Hello everyone, my name is PJ and welcome to The Void. What is The Void? Well, it's this place. A vast emptiness all my own in which I can do or make anything I want in a snap.
Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-day, your mother has the super gay!
Today I'm gonna be talking about Dark Souls 3. Why am I starting with the last game in the series? Well, because I already completed the first 4 on my other channel and I really don't feel like playing them again so soon. I will someday though. For those who don't know, Dark Souls is... Gosh, it's really difficult to summarize what makes a Souls game. Well, I'll give it a shot. The Soulsborne series, developed by From Software, consists of 5 games. Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls 3. All 5 games, and their many clones called Souls-likes, are action RPGs where you explore a Metroidvania-style open world that's constructed like a dungeon with shortcuts that make getting around on foot easier and checkpoints that you can warp between. When you defeat enemies or sell items, you get currency in the form of souls, or whatever that specific game uses, which can be spent either on items and services or on leveling. So you have to decide how to best spend your hard-earned souls. If you die, which you will, you drop a bloodstain that contains all the souls you were carrying, and if you don't return to the spot where you died and pick them up before dying again, you lose them permanently. Souls games are notoriously hard, but are often cited for being fair about their difficulty. If you take your time and examine your surroundings, you won't fall for the traps. If you get a feel for your enemies and learn their patterns, you can defeat them more easily than if you just rush them all. There's some platforming sections here and there, but the main focus is on the combat, with hundreds of weapons, armor sets, and spells to choose from. The way they tell stories is also considered to be quite unique, being told only vaguely to the player. The rest must be discerned through reading item descriptions and noticing patterns in the environment. Although the games can be played single player, there is a strongly recommended multiplayer aspect. You can play online with your friends or with random strangers, engage in friendly duels. Sorry, I meant get wrecked by trolls and power gamers who force their way into your world in order to kill you with endgame gear. And if that sounds like they're hacking, they're not. Getting invaded is part of the game. It's the price you pay for trying to make the game easier by summoning allies. It's the kind of game that can be played in any way you want. You can spend all your souls on leveling up and beat the game by yourself. You can get your friends to help you reach the end without leveling up once. You can forsake beating the game entirely and just hang out in early areas invading people. The possibilities are endless. Despite this consistent formula, every game has things they do differently. Some people like Dark Souls 1 the best for its slow combat and interwoven world. Some people hate Dark Souls 2, although it's my personal favorite. And not nearly enough people have even played Demon Souls for a consensus to be formed. So, how does Dark Souls 3 differ? Well, let me start by giving you a spoiler warning for the entire series. Strap yourselves in. This is gonna be a long one. First, the graphics. By far, DS3 is the best looking game in Soulsborne. The monsters are cool and vicious looking, and the environments are especially stunning to behold. No matter how many times I play, I never get tired of entering Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. There's a reason gorgeous view is a phrase you can put in the player-made messages. But even the most beautiful art has its secrets. Up close, textures are very blurred and there are several polygons missing throughout the game. It's easy to get close to low poly backdrops and spot looping textures. These games also have destructible environments. It's fun to roll into rooms full of easily broken barrels, but then your immersion is ruined by floating debris. This is a bug that they have not even bothered to try fixing even after 5 games. DS3 probably has the most in-depth character creator in the series. It's much easier to create a pretty character in this game than it was in Dark Souls 1. However, it shares an issue I've also noticed in Bloodborne and in Final Fantasy XIV. Their skin is way too smooth and shiny. They look like porcelain and it's kind of creepy. I don't know, maybe it's the engine or just some 8th generation fad, but it is cool that the hairstyles are no longer restricted by gender, which was a problem in previous games. The bad is extremely minimal in this case, so graphics are definitely getting a point, if only for pure art direction. Second, the music. Almost none of the areas in Souls games have any background music. They're dead silent, save for the wind and the mad garbles of beasts lurking around the next corner. I'm not complaining about the lack of ambiance, since that's clearly the atmosphere they're going for, but these games do have decently sized soundtracks, so when does the music play? Yes, the majority of Dark Souls songs are boss themes. Bosses are a very big deal in these games, and each typically gets its own song. However, some of the soundtracks in the series aren't particularly memorable. I like a few songs from Demon Souls, and Dark Souls 2 probably has the most forgettable OST in the series, but the music for DS1, DS3, and Bloodborne seem to be the most popular, especially DS1. Dark Souls 3 has a lot of good songs. My personal favorites are the themes for the Abyss Watchers, the Twin Princes, and Yorn the Giant. There is one small criticism I have though. Almost every song in the game uses a choir, and while I do love songs like that with all my soul, don't you think that sort of epicness should be, a little more reserved? It's like they were trying to make every single boss the best boss in the game, which is not a bad ambition to have, and since you're not fighting multiple bosses in a row, I guess the intensity is balanced by the silence between. So, music gets a point. Third, gameplay. I want to make some things perfectly clear, okay? I am not bad at Souls games. I soloed all of Demon Souls. I soloed the 4 Kings at Soul level 30. I soloed the Fume Knight, and I soloed the Orphan of Kos on New Game Plus. And as I showed you at the beginning of this video, I platinumed DS3, which means I had to beat the super boss on New Game Plus. And that's on PS4. No cheat engine. I even went above and beyond the trophies and got every single weapon and armor piece and completed all of the covenants, DLC included. I did this so that my harsh criticisms of the game would be warranted. I didn't want to just beat the game, criticize it in a review, and have everyone be like, oh, you didn't get the full experience, or, oh, you're just mad because you're bad at the game, get good. I got the full experience. I got good. I didn't get amazing, but I got good. And it was only after doing so that I would feel I had the right to even suggest that this game might be poorly designed. Let me start by saying that I do not believe this game is unfun. I have yet to play a Souls game that I didn't think was fun, and I feel comfortable returning to any of them. I'm just saying that I wouldn't rank this game in my top 3 games of the genre. Those would be DS1, DS2, and Bloodborne. Dark Souls 3 does do a lot of things right, but it also does a lot of things wrong. In Dark Souls 1, it was possible to hold a weapon in each hand, but it didn't really accomplish anything. Dark Souls 2 had the Power Stance feature, which let you unlock new movesets by dual-wielding certain weapons. It was very in-depth, but DS3 scrapped it in favor of twin weapons and weapon arts. There are some weapons, like the Brigand Twin Daggers, that take up 1 inventory slot and can be used as either 1 or 2 weapons. Every weapon also has a weapon art attached to it that lets you use special attacks or abilities at the cost of focus points. These weapon arts are pretty cool, but I still wish they hadn't gotten rid of power stancing. In DS1, you had a fixed speed for climbing ladders. In DS2, you could spend stamina to run up ladders faster. In DS3, you can still run up ladders, but it no longer costs stamina. Okay, so why isn't it the faster speed by default? It costs nothing other than hurting your thumb to hold down the circle button. At least you can heal yourself while on ladders now. You can also move while drinking or gesturing, as well as cancel out of gestures. You couldn't do that in some of the previous games, where doing either made you an easy target. It's one of the reasons this became so popular. When you can't carry any more of a certain item, extras that you pick up are automatically sent to storage and your current stock is refilled when you rest at a checkpoint, which are called bonfires, by the way. However, if you teleport back to the bonfire, it resets everything in the area. It heals you to full and respawns all the enemies just like what the bonfire does, but it doesn't refill your items. If you don't notice that, you might wander back out into the fray without any items and then have to run back. It forces you to sit at the bonfire after warping to it. That needs to be fixed. DS1 and DS2 had spell slots for its magic, where each copy of a spell could be used only a certain number of times each. This was kind of annoying since you had to play the game multiple times and equip multiple copies of the same spell in order to cast it more often. DS3 goes back to Demon Souls' method of using MP, allowing for more flexible casting. This game and Bloodborne no longer require you to upgrade all your individual armor pieces, so finally you can switch between all your armor sets without having to worry about unoptimized defenses. The weapon enchantment system is the best in DS3, following in the footsteps of DS2 and discarding the complicated, unbalanced system from DS1. Locking on has always functioned pretty much the same. When locked on, you can move toward, away, clockwise, or counterclockwise in relation to your target. But in DS3, you can move in any direction while locked on so long as you're running. Plunging attacks work best in DS3, allowing you to turn toward your target while falling and increasing your chances of landing a hit. It's really nice that you can now sell items to almost any merchant. DS1 and 2 each had one merchant that would buy things from you, and one of them was extremely picky. Some enemies in the series have grab attacks. In DS1, you could escape these grabs by mashing L1 and R1, but you can't do that anymore in DS3. Well, except for the Stray Demon, which is good since his is the most bullshit grab attack of all. To invade in Souls games, you usually need to consume an item called a cracked red eye orb, but DS1 and DS3 each have whole red eye orbs that can be used infinitely. In DS1, you had to beat a really powerful boss early on in order to get it, but the method of getting it early in DS3 was incredibly easy, both to figure out and to do, making the cracked orbs useless. In previous games, when you use one of these red eye orbs, it will briefly search for a player to invade, and if it fails, you have to use the item again. Dark Souls 3 makes it so that you only had to use it once, and it will continually search until it is interrupted or successful. All of these games have New Game Plus options, and every new cycle increases the strength and rewards of the enemies. DS3 has by far the easiest New Game Pluses, as each successive playthrough actually seems easier than the last for some reason, which is good because I always dreaded going through New Game Plus in previous games. However, there's a slight problem. In New Game Plus, you can find stronger +1 and +2 variations of the game's rings, which makes sense, giving you stronger gear to tackle stronger enemies. However, the DLC areas can be accessed almost as soon as the game starts and are filled with +3 rings, making some of the New Game Plus rings useless, though you do still have to get every single ring variation in order to get the trophy. It is impossible to see everything with a single character. There are 2 unique versions of the Young White branch, each with different descriptions, but it's impossible to get both of them unless maybe another player gives you the other one. It may add some small degree of replayability, but it's very aggravating for completionists. Most Souls games have PvP arenas, and DS3 has the best ones. There's a variety of themes and settings to the areas, and you can play with quite a few different team setups. Even though this game doesn't have the best PvP, those would be DS2 and Bloodborne, setting up PvP matches and even fight clubs is easiest in this one. In Souls games, it is impossible to communicate with other players through in-game means. Instead, there are items you can use that say a small number of phrases,
Very good.
and a wide variety of gestures for communicating through body language. You can wave, bow in a few different ways, tell your victims to stay on the ground where they belong, sit and make a toast, lie down, or even praise the sun. Unfortunately, there's an unpatched exploit where gesturing allies cannot be interacted with, so if they're lying in a doorway, the host can't get through and is forced to dismiss them to get them out of the way. As you can see, every new good feature brings with it a negative and vice versa. Each improvement is accompanied by a downgrade. Everything is a double-edged sword, and the quality of the gameplay has barely improved from previous entries. Thus, no score change for gameplay. I do have other gameplay-related things to mention, but I'll save those for the miscellaneous category. Fourth, story. Since this is the last chronological entry in the 3 Dark Souls games, it's really hard to follow any of what's going on without knowledge of the prior games, so let me try to summarize. In the beginning, there was only grey fog, immortal stone dragons, and mindless zombies. Then, the first flame appeared, bringing with it souls and disparity. Light, dark, life, and death were brought into the world, inciting growth and change. The mindless zombies that once wandered the Greylands transformed into various races, depending on what kind of souls they received. There were lords who fancied themselves gods, witches, and of course, humans. The leader of the gods and bearer of the light soul was Lord Gwyn, who ruled the world for the entirety of the Age of Fire. However, fires fade, and the first flame is no exception. With the light fading from the world, Gwyn began to fear the coming Age of Dark, the age of humans who possessed the Dark Soul. And so he offered his own soul as kindling for the first flame, sacrificing himself to extend the Age of the Gods. Gwyn's followers shepherded the humans and taught them to fear the dark that resides within them, and deceived them into becoming further kindling for the first flame, forever prolonging the gods' reign. At the end of each game, you are given a choice to sacrifice yourself to kindle the flame, or abandon it and let it fade, allowing the world to succumb to darkness. No matter how you look at it, neither of these options sound like a solution, but the characters nonetheless fight with their lives to achieve one of these two goals. Some characters even become so despondent from their inability to change anything that they lose their souls and become zombies again, a process called going hollow. Whenever a creature loses their soul, they revert to whatever creature they would have been during the Grey Age. Normally, hollowing isn't possible during times of peace, but the fire fading is what causes it to start happening, either because the dark is growing stronger as a result, or souls in general are weakening. It's not clear. Nothing in Souls games is ever explicitly explained. This brings us to Dark Souls 3. The fire is fading yet again, but this time a group of extra powerful souls is required to sate the flame. Inexplicably, all the most powerful beings to ever kindle the fire rise from their graves, being expected to do so again, but they abandon this duty for unknown reasons. Thus, champions from throughout time, people who once attempted to link the fire but failed, also rise from their graves and are tasked with forcing the Lords of Cinder into doing their job. And your character is one of these champions, some of the unkindled ash. These are only the basics. The amount of lore in these games is so massive and convoluted, some people dedicate their livelihoods to studying and explaining it. Themes like what makes someone human, or is dark really that bad, are explored in these games, but the characters never seem to arrive at decisive answers. Secrets are still being discovered to this day, and new theories pop up all the time. Exploring the environments, reading item descriptions, hearing what the characters have to say, and even experimenting with the mechanics are the only ways to understand the world and the goings-on within. For example, there is a boss who actually goes hollow between the first and second phases of his fight. It's not explained or shown that this is happening, but it is only during the second phase onward that he becomes weak to the Hollow Slayer Greatsword, a weapon that deals more damage to hollows. Who would have guessed something like an elemental weakness would reveal such an important story detail? It's insane shit like this that gets the story an overwhelming +1. Fifth, presentation. It's an 8th gen game, so naturally there's no manual, but there is a collector's edition that comes with a ridiculously expensive statue of the final boss, which is wielding the wrong weapons. Must have been made early in development. Also, just want to point out real quick that the back of the box says it's for mature audiences because it contains blood, violence, sang, and more violence. All the Souls games have great voice acting. You can really tell a lot about the upbringing and personalities of the characters just from their tones of voice.
Ah, another one roused from the sleep of death. Well, you're not alone. We unkindled are worthless. Can't even die right. Gives me conniptions.
Bring the stones, and I'll do the smithing. It's my purpose, after all. In battle, your weapons are your only friends. Forge them well, and they won't let you down.
I just wish all the characters had lip syncing, but there are possible lore reasons for why some do and some don't. The choreography of the cutscenes is pretty damn impressive too, as they've been for pretty much every game thus far. The in-game menus are kind of a cluttered mess. There are so many stats, items, and settings to keep track of, and there's little in the way of cursor memory. Organizing the hundreds of items you pick up is a chore, and the shop menus don't remove items that can no longer be bought. What's more, the way to actually sort items is hidden unless you open a separate window to figure out how it's done. So, no manual, a disappointing collector's reward, messy menus, but fantastic voice acting and cutscenes. Gotta say, no score change for presentation. Our Miscellaneous category begins with the things that frustrated me the most about the entire experience: hitboxes and invincibility frames. The hit detection on attacks is just awful. Weapons that are 2 feet away will still hit. For balancing's sake, I know why they're programmed this way, but it still feels cheap when you get hit by a weapon that looks like it missed you. Just make the weapons longer to match the hitboxes. Whenever you try to attack when next to a wall, it'll bounce off and cancel the animation. Okay, makes sense. So why can every enemy in every game attack through them? I thought these games were supposed to be fair. Either make enemy attacks bounce off walls too, or let players attack through walls. Normally, attacks have wind-up frames, tells that show you what attack is coming so you can react to it. Unfortunately, some attacks don't have tells, which would be fine if they were weak attacks, but some of them are from large weapons. Trying to land backstabs now is practically impossible. Even if you're right behind an enemy, sometimes it just won't happen, and sometimes it will happen, but the target just walks away, leaving you to awkwardly stab the air. You will see the backstab animation more than twice as often as you'll see actual backstabs. And now you might be thinking, oh, the game is just giving players extra iframes to be more forgiving. Well, if that's true, then why do you have less iframes while getting up from the ground? Normally, you're supposed to be invincible during this part. After all, you can't do anything until the animation is over. But your iframes end before the animation does. I can't tell you how many times I just stopped playing because something killed me while I was still recovering from its last attack. I once used 100 arrows trying to kill an enemy from a distance. I saw blood splattering, and once in a while it would even react to getting hit. But turns out, if you can't see the health bar, you're not dealing any damage. Need I say more? -1. On the topic of janky mechanics, let's talk about Poise. Ever since this game came out, the community has been struggling to figure out what the Poise stat actually does, because it doesn't function anything like in the previous games, where it just reduces the likelihood of getting staggered by attacks. There was even a point where people believed Poise wasn't working and did nothing, but From insisted that it's working as intended. A quote that's become something of a meme these days. Even after watching people hack the game, read the code, experiment in-game, and try to explain the mechanic with a shitload of math and terms like poised health and poise frames, I still don't understand it. Most people still don't. I really wish From would just come out and explain how it works, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. Because if you're good enough at dodging or blocking everything, Poise is useless to you. So no point in adjusting the score based on an optional feature. The way co-op works in Dark Souls is pretty simple. You use an item called a white sign soapstone to leave your signature on the ground, and it shows up in other people's games in the exact same spot. The first person to examine it summons you to their world to engage in jolly cooperation, where you remain until either of you die or the boss is defeated, after which that host forfeits multiplayer access in that area until the boss returns in New Game Plus. For successfully helping the host with the boss, you are returned to human or embered form if you weren't already in it, and receive an item that helps you to do so without having to aid another host. Usually there's also a level range that both players have to fall within in order to interact, but you can bypass this with the new password system, which will automatically scale players with the same password to the host's level. But wait, if they have a formula for scaling player stats to match the host's, why are they still using the stupid level range restriction? Why not just let you play with everyone in the game, scale all of them to your level when they're in your world, and just use passwords to connect with your friends more easily? Whatever, doesn't matter. Anyway, Dark Souls 2 had this really cool variation of the item called the small white soapstone. When summoned using this, you don't have to stick around for the boss. You just have to help the host defeat a few enemies and then are automatically sent home. While not guaranteed to regain human form by doing this, you can if you do it enough times. What's more, hosts can see these signs even if the boss is already dead in their world, so you won't forfeit multiplayer by beating all the bosses. It's a fantastic item, but why am I bringing it up? Because DS3 didn't bring it back. That's why. This is a very picky, personal thing, but it's my review and I'm taking away a point for this. Does that sound unfair to you? Well, this is Dark Souls we're talking about, so par for the course. In previous Dark Souls games, being non-human meant looking like a zombie, and for the vain idealists who play these games, like me, we prefer to be pretty all the time. Fortunately, in DS3, you can look human all the time, no matter how much you die. Unless you're doing the Long Door questline, which will make you start to look like a zombie after dying a few times, but there are multiple in-game ways to undo this. Additionally, this is the only game in the series where you can change your character's appearance after the start. So, +1 for not wasting my time with the character creator. An optional but effective and hard to master mechanic of the game is parrying. By holding a small shield or other item capable of doing so, you can time a parry at just the right moment to knock away an enemy's attack and leave them open for a counter, called a riposte, which does more damage than a backstab. In PvP, it can be hard to pull these off due to the unpredictability of human opponents, not to mention the lag, but it's a skill that's worth mastering. Conversely, some enemies can also parry you, but they usually have tells that show you when not to attack lest you get automatically parried. The thing I'm complaining about right now though are the enemies that can parry you without warning. These enemies should not be allowed to do this. Since they're AI controlled, they will not fail to parry you with frame-perfect timing and will just get in an automatic riposte. There should not be enemies that can just damage you for free. It's like the game is punishing you for using melee weapons. -1. And finally, let's talk about Covenants. In every game except Demon's Souls, there are these factions you can join called Covenants, most of which relate to multiplayer. There's one that makes co-op easier and more rewarding, one that rewards you for more invasions, several that automatically summon you to defend a certain area, or to protect an invaded host who themselves is a member of a covenant specifically meant to request your aid, and more. DS3 even has a unique covenant where players can replace one of the bosses, getting stat buffs and special items to make them very formidable. On paper, these sound like cool ideas, but for some reason, the series has yet to do them right. DS1 used to punish you for switching covenants, some of which were actually useless. DS2 required biblical amounts of labor to get all the covenant rewards, and Bloodborne barely even has covenants. DS3, thankfully, has the best covenant system thus far. For instance, you can switch covenants anywhere you want, and there are almost no penalties for doing so. But there are some questionable decisions they made with two covenants in particular. The Dark Moon Sentinels. For some reason, Blades of the Dark Moon and Blue Sentinels both return in this game, and they do the exact same thing. They get the same rewards too, except that Dark Moons get extra rewards if they kill members of a certain other covenant, making them objectively better. I guess since you get access to Sentinels first, Dark Moon is meant to be an upgrade to it. But that's not the only thing wrong with these two covenants. As I mentioned before, both were in the previous games, but in Dark Souls 2 and 3, they suck! Let me explain. In DS3, when you are a member of either covenant, you just have to wait to get summoned. This in particular is difficult because there are a few prerequisites. 1. A host has to get invaded and not die to the invader immediately. 2. Said host also has to have the Way of Blue Covenant equipped, which most of them forget to do. 3. After you are summoned, you appear in a random spot in the host's area and then have to either find the host to defend them or find the invader to kill them, all while dealing with the enemies still alive in the host's world. And if the host dies, you fail and are automatically dismissed. I don't understand why it's like this. Why can't you just be summoned to an area that's very close to the host? And why are some of the spawn points right next to mobs of enemies? How am I supposed to help people if the game itself is digging me over? And why does the host need to be part of Way of the Blue? What, I can't help fellow Sentinels or Dark Moons? You should be able to assist anyone who's not in a covenant that rivals your own, like Aldrich Faithfuls or Rosarius Fingers. And my last gripe with covenants is that you can be auto-summoned while enemies are aggroed. Since it can take a long, unpredictable amount of time to get summoned, you should be playing the game while you wait. You might be almost done killing a tough enemy, but then you get whisked away to another world. And when you return, not only are you right in front of that enemy, but it's also been fully healed. Covenants have always been a mess, but I still had to credit DS3 for the new features, so no score change. 6 out of 10. Better than I expected, actually. It's definitely an above average experience. I just don't love it as much as everyone else seems to. I still like DS1, DS2, and Bloodborne better, but I don't think DS3 is a bad game. It just needs some serious ironing out. They all do. Well, that was exhausting. Over 330 hours of gameplay, over 130 recorded videos, and over 60 gigs of file space. By far my biggest project yet. If you're a fan of Dark Souls 3, or if this video got you interested, there are 3 other YouTube channels I recommend. The first is Vati Vidya, who specializes in lore videos. The second is Fighter PL, who makes a lot of really entertaining PvP compilations. And lastly is Limit Breakers, where you can find lots of really high quality memes, editorials, on useless Dark Souls 3 data. Thank you all so much for sticking with me through all this. Until next time, I'll be here, in the darkness, quietly awaiting your return.